Hey there, my name's Brashler, and in this video, I want to teach you about the Waves CLA-76. Now, this is one of my favorite compressors to use on vocals, and pretty much any vocal that I have ever mixed live, and I have Waves available to me, I am inserting it on that vocal. Now, the 1176 is what this compressor is modeled after, and this was released a long time ago and is one of the most classic compressors out there that is used in studios all around the world. Now, let's actually dive in and see how this thing is used and what controls we have for it. Now, I have a vocal here pulled up with some music, and I just want to have you listen to it first. Now, the only processing that I have on this vocal is a high pass and low pass, and then just a PSE, which I was talking to you about this in a previous video, and if you haven't checked that out, make sure to check that out because this is great for helping reduce some of the drum bleed on stage. Now, this vocal is dry. There's no EQ and no compression yet. So let's go ahead and listen to what this thing sounds like.
Within your own zone, like a lion, you beat the grave, roll the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying, you do the same with me. You're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection.
Now, honestly, this vocal is rockin'. I love this vocal. Now, the one thing that I noticed is right here, we have a very loud word.
Lord, I'm praying, you do the same with me.
Praying is just straight in your face, pretty loud, and then me starts out pretty soft and then comes back in, which is totally fine. But then right after that, there's a few words that also get kind of lost in that mix. Now, of course, I am pushing this vocal pretty hot in this mix right now because we don't have compression and there's no EQ. So let's listen to this part again here.
Lord, I'm praying, you do the same with me. You're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power.
Now, this is where we can bring in compression. Now, compression is going to take those louder portions of the vocal and turn them down with gain reduction. And then we can bring in the rest of the vocal in volume up. So it, in turn, turns down the loud parts and turns up the softer parts by just bringing in that output gain back up. And so let's go ahead and actually insert this 1176. So go to plugin list, go to dynamics, and under dynamics, we have the CLA-76 right here. Now, when we pull this up, there are a bunch of different adjustments and things that we have in front of us. We have an input, we have an output, attack, release. Our ratio is a button here. We also have different metering setups that we have. We can also bypass the compressor here. And then we also have analog and then revision. We have a mix knob and our trim up and down. So the CLA-76 is a FET type compressor, which is field effect transistor. Now, this type of compressor is insanely fast. So with our attack settings, the lower the number, the slower the attack. The higher the number, the faster the attack. Now, the attack times on this compressor is between 800 microseconds and 20 microseconds, or 0.8 milliseconds and 0.02 milliseconds. So super, super fast. So if you have this all the way up at 7, you have an attack time of 0.02 milliseconds, which is very, very fast. And then on the release side, if we have this up at 7, that's around 50 milliseconds. And then if we take it to 1, that's going to be the slowest release setting, which is around 1.1 seconds. So we have a lot of adjustability as far as timings go on this. Then we have our input and our output. So the input is how much volume we want to put into this compressor. So if you want to have more compression on this compressor, then you want to raise the input. Now, likewise, once we raise that input, we are turning up the volume. And so our output knob is the gain after the compression. So if we raise our input, we need to lower our output. And that's basically the way that this works. Now, the output is post-compression. So no matter how much compression you are landing, wherever you have this knob is post-compression. So when we need to get more or less compression, we need to be adjusting the input gain which is right here. Then we come to our ratio. Now we have a couple different ratios on this compressor. We have a 4:1, an 8:1, 12:1, 20:1, and then this really cool thing called an all buttons mode, which I'll teach you guys here in a little bit. But with our compression, we can choose our ratio. Now our ratio is going to define how much actual compression we are clamping down on. So a 4:1 compression is going to have less compression than a 20:1. And typically once we go above a 10:1 ratio, we are in the more limiting category, because basically for every 20 dB above the threshold with a 20:1 ratio, it's only going to go up by 1 dB in the output volume. And then if we hit 40:1, then we go up 2 dB in volume. So we can see that theoretically with a 20:1, it is limiting. You know, there's not much more volume that we can get out of a circuit if we have a 20:1 compression. However, if we go down to a 4:1 compression, for every 4 dB up it goes above that threshold point, the output is only going to be up 1 dB. And so if we go 8 dB up, then now we're at 2 dB. And so on and so forth. Now, the next thing that we have here is down on the bottom. We have this analog button. Now, this has a 50 hertz and a 60 hertz. Now, this just emulates noise and a little bit of a ground hum of power of what the originals sounded like. So if you want to have that really analog character with a little bit more noise, we can turn on 60 or 50, depending on if you want a US cycled hum and power or a British cycle hum and power. Now, the only thing that this does not do is the analog circuit does not add any harmonics or any different character. The only thing that it adds is noise. So in a live environment, my choice is to have this turned off. So every time that I'm using the CLA-76, I'm choosing to have the analog circuit turned off, because the character of this compressor is already built into this compressor without it being turned on with our analog. Now, there are two versions of this plugin. We have the Blacky, which is the revision B, and then we have the Bluey, which is the revision A. Now, the Bluey has a more aggressive character, and I find that it has a little bit more in the upper mid-range. So we're talking like 1 to 4K. That portion of a vocal, say on a Bluey compressor, is going to come through a little bit more. So it just has a little bit more aggressive of a character. And then the Blacky is a little bit more subtle in that area. Now, depending on the vocal and the style of music that you're mixing, either one could sound amazing. So this is really something that just comes down to your ear and what the song sounds like. Now, because this is a little bit more aggressive of a song, I'm going to be probably choosing more of the Bluey sound, but I'm going to give you a chance to listen to both of them. Now, the next thing that we have is a mix knob. Now, the mix knob allows us to bring in some of the pre-processed signal and bypass the compression. So if I have this set to 50, then I am letting in half of the original signal and half of the compressed signal together. And now this gives us more of a parallel style compression on this single compressor. And then of course we have our trim, which allows us to gain or reduce the amount of volume in and out of this compressor. Okay, so I know that that was a lot. Let's actually listen to this thing and get it going here. So I'm going to actually mute the band and we can just listen to this compressor.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me.
Let's go back to right here. There we go.
But then you rose up
So,
like a lion.
if I turn this input down, we will notice that there is a lot less compression happening. Also, the vocal is quieter. So as we raise this up, we will start seeing some gain reduction happening.
Your resurrection power lives in me. I come alive when you fan the flame. Holy Spirit, fire, come and
So it's right there. Now, one thing that I always do when I'm setting up a compressor is I will turn it on and off to see the loudness that I'm adding or reducing with this one single plugin. Now, I'm always doing that with any plugin. EQ, compression are going to be the main ones, because if you boost some EQ, you are actually turning up the volume of that channel. If you end up adding in a compressor and you have a ton of gain reduction, you are turning it down. So that's one reason that I go ahead and insert and uninsert this plugin. So let's go ahead and listen.
But then you rose up
So there
like
it is
a
without.
lion. You beat the grave of
And
the
there it
stone,
is
let the
in.
light
So it is
in.
turning it down
Lord,
just a
I'm
little bit.
praying
So what I can
you
do is I
the
can turn this
same
up.
with me, 'cause you're still robbing grace,
Now, let's
still
actually go ahead
breaking
and
chains.
use
Your
release
resurrection
attack
power
settings set here.
lives in me. I come.
So with a vocal, I am pretty much always having my attack time starting straight up and my release at 7. So fastest that I can go on the release time. And remember, this is a super fast compressor. So our attack time being right in the middle is still a pretty happy medium on this. So let's go ahead and listen to this.
But then you rose up
Now,
like
the
a
idea of this
lion.
compression
You beat
is
the
to
grave
reduce some of
the
those really
stone,
loud
let the
portions of
light
this
in.
vocal.
Lord, I'm praying
Like that word.
you do the same with me.
And so with this vocal, I'm going to be choosing a 12-to-1 ratio. With my vocals, I love to have a very heavy compression sound to it. So by choosing a 12-to-1 ratio, it's going to be very aggressive. Now, with compression, I do need to mention that if you have a microphone that is close to feeding back in your PA, adding compression is going to cause that to feed back even faster. Because what you're doing is you're enabling the compressor to turn down the loud parts and then bring up the volume of the rest of the vocal. And so by bringing up the volume of that vocal, you are in essence turning up your fader. And so if you have a microphone that has a small gain before feedback ratio, then adding compression is going to make that even worse. So make sure that your PA deployment is correct, that your monitors aren't too loud on stage before you start adding in a ton of compression. So just keep that in mind.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave of the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me, 'cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power lives
Okay,
in.
so let's go ahead and listen to this one section again with the band. And I'm going to have this inserted here.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave of the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me.
Okay, so that one section right here.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me.
Let's listen to it without compression.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me.
So praying pretty loud. Me really starts out pretty low. Let's go ahead and add the compression back in.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. You're still.
Now I could take this a little bit farther and get those a little bit more even, but let's go ahead and check out the sound of the Bluey and listen to the difference between the Bluey and the Blacky real fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press A to B. And now remember, with every Waves plugin, there are two sides of the plugin. We have our setup A, and then we also have our setup B. So what's great about this is if you press the A to B button, you can copy your settings from your A setup to your B setup, and then start adjusting whatever you want. And then all you have to do is just go ahead and click between these two to be able to cycle between the two plugin settings that you have. So this is a great way of just having a saved setup, let you go ahead and play with all the adjustments that you want to and see if you made it better or sometimes worse. So let's go ahead and press setup A to B, and then I am going to start adjusting my A side. So I'm going to go ahead and press Bluey. So I'm going to mute the band again and listen to this vocal, and we can start dialing this in.
But then you rose up like a lion.
Already,
You beat the
you can hear
grave
it.
of the stone, let the
Just
light
aggressive.
in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me, 'cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power lives in me. I come alive when you fan the flame. Holy Spirit, fire, come and rest on me.
All right.
Come.
So I'm going to cycle between these two just by pressing our setup A versus B. Now, one thing you'll notice is that my compression settings changed slightly with my input and output between the Bluey and the Blacky. This is because the Bluey is going to be more aggressive. So it's going to take that compression and be compressing that input a little bit faster than the Blacky would. So let's go ahead and listen to these.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave, hold the stone, let the light in.
Listen to that one again.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave, hold the stone, let the light in. But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave, hold the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power lives in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me.
Okay, and here's the Bluey.
You're still Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still.
So it's very subtle between the two of these. The Bluey is definitely a more aggressive sound to it, or the blue stripe compressor, and the Blacky is a little bit more subtle, kind of leaning back just a little bit. And so for this particular song and this vocal, I'm definitely loving the Bluey versus the Blacky on this. And that's what's great about the CLA-76 is you have both options for you. So let's go ahead and listen to the difference between these two in this one section with the band in.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains.
Here it is with the Blacky.
Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power.
And I really love the Bluey. So let's go ahead and listen to this whole section with this in, and then I will uninsert to give you guys that listen of what it sounded like before.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave, hold the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains.
All right, let's listen to this without the compression.
But then you rose up like a lion. You beat the grave, hold the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking.
Now, I do have some limiting happening on my stereo bus for processing for YouTube, for you guys to listen to this. So on YouTube, you're not going to be hearing as much of the Lord, I'm praying, with the praying coming through really, really hot, but it's pretty subtle, but it's enough that you can still notice that. But if you don't have the stereo bus compression happening, you don't have the stereo bus limiting that I have, and you're in a live vocal room with, you know, mixing a band, that one word is just going to come straight through the PA, pretty loud, and just like, ooh, wow, which is fine. But when we add in this compression, it makes it a little bit nicer of a package to listen to. So I really love this in this. Now, we can also take this one step farther and add an optical compressor on the end of this and have just a little bit of compression with the optical compressor. So the difference between a FET and an optical is the optical is just going to be a little bit more smooth of a compressor versus the FET type compressor. So I will have another video on the CLA-2A for that, but keep in tune for that one. Now, this compressor also sounds amazing on the bass guitar. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my board here just to listen to our bass. And what I want to show you is using this CLA-76 on the bass guitar with all buttons mode. Now the all buttons mode makes this massive sound to it. And then the other aspect of this is because we have such a fast attack time and such a fast release time, we can actually add distortion to an input by using a compressor. So let's go ahead and pull up my bass. Now I have two bass guitars. It's the same bass guitar, but one is my bass DI, which is just a pretty dry signal. So let's go ahead and listen to this.
But then you rose up.
Okay, and here's without this compression. Here it is with. So this is just to smooth out some transients. It's nothing crazy with this bass. Now, Then the other thing that I do is I add in a dirty bass. And so what the dirty bass does is it allows me to add in some grittiness to the bass guitar if I find that I need it in my mix. Now, if you know your bassist and they have a really great pedal setup, then you probably don't need to do this. But if you have a bass guitarist that is just kind of doing their bass guitar right into a DI and it's just a little bit on the lifeless side, and I'm not saying his bass guitar is lifeless, but you want to add some of that grit to make it stand out in that mix during moments. You know, that final chorus when you just need a little bit more of something in that to give a little bit more energy to that song. You can add in a gritty bass guitar into that to give it a little bit more life. And so to do this, what we have done is I've added this 1176, and I have turned up the attack to as fast as it can go and the release to as fast as it can go. Now, the other portion of this is the all buttons mode, which just applies a massive amount of compression on this. And when you do an all buttons mode, you'll notice that you need to turn the input gain down a lot to be able to have just a small amount of compression. So if you're using the all buttons mode, the goal is a massive amount of compression. And so typically, when I'm using an all buttons mode, it is on a parallel bus. So we are basically doing a parallel bass guitar here. So with my bass DI and my bass dirty, I have the ability of turning up both of them at different times and blending the two of them together to get this kind of parallel compression in essence. And then the other aspect of this is I sometimes actually put this on a vocal parallel. So I'll take all my vocals and I'll put them into a vocal bus, and then I'll also make a vocal parallel bus, and I'll add an all buttons mode with kind of the same attack settings that I did with a normal vocal, but it just adds in this really nice amount of compression that we can kind of fade underneath. So let's actually listen to this. Now, if I turn my attack to a normal time, we can just hear the amount of compression there. But the beauty of this happens... Let's find a spot. There we go. The beauty of this really happens when we turn our attack and release times up. And I need to find a spot where he doesn't have his... Okay. Just right there between 5 and 7, you can hear that distortion coming in. Now, that distortion is because we are cutting off the waveform pretty fast. So what's happening is a little bit is coming through on the attack time, but then it is getting cut off and compressed a lot. And so that's what's happening with this compression, is that we are adding in the sound of distortion by using this compressor like this. Now, when I typically set up a dirty bass, what I'm also doing is I'm going to be boosting the mid-range because I'm wanting that distortion sound to come through and get that gritty sound, especially if you have a bass guitarist that's really leaning back and not really plucking the strings hard. And it's just kind of like boom, boom, that sort of sound. Then what we want is we want some of that sound of the strings, of the frets, of that mid-range to come through. So this guitarist is great with his bass tone, so I didn't really need to do this. But in essence, let's go ahead and listen to this. So that's with the EQ inserted. Okay, and so we can blend this by just bringing it right underneath, which is nice. Okay, let's go ahead and bring in the rest of the band here. And add in the vocals, and I'll go back to my bass. There it is.
Like a lion, you beat the grave, roll the stone, let the light in. Lord, I'm praying you do the same with me. 'Cause you're still robbing grace, still breaking chains. Your resurrection power lives in me. I come alive when you.
Now, so this is one thing that I end up adding, but I really only add it if the bassist doesn't have a nice distortion pedal, which this bassist does have that. But this is one tool that you can have in your belt when you have that bassist that's just kind of a really dull tone and you just need to add something to that last chorus to make it, you know, a little bit bigger. And when you have an extra channel, like you have on the LV1 with 64 channels, then you can just double patch that, take it from the same input, and create a separate thing. Now, the one thing that you need to be careful of is that you keep the same amount of delay or latency between these two racks. And so with my two racks here that I have, both of them are doing a latency of 0, which you can see here. All the plugins that I've chosen have a latency of 0. But if you added in a plugin, you just need to be careful about the latency. So make sure to keep the latency between the two channels identical. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you today. The 1176 or the CLA-76 is one of my favorite compressors that I'm using. It's always used on a vocal for me. It's where my vocal tone in my mixes really comes from. Now, of course, if you're mixing a lot more laid back of music, I might be choosing a different compressor than the CLA-76. But for the most part, most of the genres of music that I'm mixing need that really aggressive in-your-face vocal. So for you guys that are mixing jazz or, you know, acoustic songs, having this much compression on the vocal is probably not going to be key for your genre of music, so keep that in mind. But if you do happen to have any questions, or there's a video that you're hoping that I would make on really anything that's out there, waves, consoles, different gear, please post that in the comment section down below, as I'm always reading through those comments to find videos that are going to be helpful for you. If you haven't already, make sure to check out my website at drewbrashler.com. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day.